Before Amara Okafor became a forgotten wife, before she became a woman history tried to erase, she was a daughter born into hunger and hope in equal measure. She was born in Umuocha, a village where poverty sat openly on doorsteps and dreams learned early how to whisper instead of shout. Her parents loved her, but love alone had never been enough to fill empty barns or quiet the sound of debt knocking every morning. Amara was still young when hunger began to define her days. Not the dramatic kind people talk about, but the quiet hunger that lives with you, teaches you patience, teaches you endurance, teaches you how to smile while your stomach burns. She learned early how to fetch water before dawn, how to help her mother on the farm, how to pretend she wasn't tired. Yet even then, there was something about her that refused to bow completely. She asked questions. She listened carefully. She remembered things others forgot. It was this curiosity that caught the attention of fate. When the king's messengers came to Umuocha, they did not arrive quietly. Their presence alone bent the air. Villagers gathered as though summoned by instinct, fear, and hope tangled together. Everyone knew what a visit from the palace meant. It could bring honor. It could bring disaster. Most times, it brought both. The king Aguiobena was already a man of power, wealth, and wives. 4 of them. Strong women, influential women, women who understood the politics of survival inside palace walls. But the king wanted another. Younger. Fresh. Someone who would remind him that time had not yet won. Amara's parents did not plan it. They did not plot it. Poverty planned it for them. The offer came wrapped in promises so heavy they made reason stumble. Land. Protection. Education. The king himself promised that if Amara came to the palace as his wife, her parents would never know hunger again. Their lineage would rise. Their daughter would be educated, respected. Amara stood quietly as her future was discussed in front of her like a market transaction. She listened. She watched her mother's hands tremble. She saw her father's pride wrestle with desperation. No one asked her what she wanted. Curiosity betrayed her. Fear silenced her. Poverty rushed the decision. Within days, Amara was married. The palace swallowed her whole. At first, it was overwhelming in ways she could not explain. The size, the silence, the rules, the way servants spoke only when spoken to, the way smiles did not reach eyes. She was the 5th wife and the youngest. Her presence disrupted balance she did not yet understand. The older wives watched her closely. They smiled politely. They asked harmless questions. But beneath the smiles lived sharp calculations. Amara felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered, in the way her footsteps echoed too loudly in corridors meant to intimidate. She tried to please everyone. She learned palace customs quickly. She kept her head low. She obeyed instructions. She spoke gently to servants and elders alike. Still, resentment grew. Youth was a weapon she had not meant to carry. Curiosity made her dangerous without her knowing it. The king visited her often. Too often. With each visit, tension tightened. Whispers grew bolder. Senior wives began to remind her subtly, then openly, of her place. Food arrived late. Servants forgot her needs. Small humiliations piled quietly until they became unbearable. Amara endured. She bore children. 3 of them. Each birth should have secured her place. Instead, each child deepened hostility. The palace already had heirs, 9 children before hers. Her sons were unnecessary. In palace politics, unnecessary things are dangerous. Mistreatment became cruelty. She was blamed for things she did not do, punished for offenses she did not commit. Her quarters were moved farther from the king's. Promises once spoken confidently became evasive. Education was postponed. Land discussions were delayed. Protection became conditional. Amara began to understand. She was no longer a wife. She was a problem. The day she left the palace, there were no drums, no ceremony, no explanation. She walked out with her 3 children and nothing else. The land promised to her parents never arrived. The education promised to her children dissolved into silence. The palace doors closed behind her like a sentence passed quietly but firmly. Umiwocha received her with mixed emotions. Some pitied her. Others mocked her. Many blamed her parents. Poverty welcomed her back like an old companion, familiar and unforgiving. Amara did not cry loudly. She had cried enough in places where no one listened. She focused on survival. She farmed. She sold what she could. She fed her children first and herself last. Hope shrank but did not die. Somewhere deep inside her lived the belief that this could not be the end. She was wrong, because the world was not done testing her yet. And just when Amara thought she had lost everything the palace could take from her, fate prepared another journey, one that would promise love, only to demand an even greater sacrifice. What Amara did not know was that leaving the palace was only the beginning of her suffering, and the next man she trusted would cost her more than the king ever did. Before Amara trusted love again, she promised herself one thing: she would never hand her fate over so easily. The palace had taught her what power could do to a woman without protection. Poverty had taught her how quickly the world forgets yesterday's promises. And motherhood had taught her that hope, when misplaced, could become a weapon against the heart. Yet loneliness has a voice. It speaks softly at night, when children sleep hungry and questions echo louder than answers. It whispers that survival alone is not living. That maybe, just maybe, love could still be kind. It was during one of her market days that Amara met Daniel. He was not a king, not rich, not powerful. He was ordinary in a way that felt safe. A trader who spoke gently and listened fully. He did not stare at her scars or ask questions about her past. When he learned she had children, he did not flinch. He only nodded, as though understanding something unsaid. Amara was cautious. She had learned the cost of curiosity. Still, Daniel's presence softened her days. He helped her carry goods, bought food for the children occasionally, asked about their health. Over time, his visits became routine, and routine slowly turned into trust. For the first time since the palace, Amara laughed without forcing it. Love returned quietly. They did not rush marriage. They spoke of it carefully, respectfully. Daniel promised to pay her bride price properly, to claim her honor fully, to make her children his own. The promise stirred something fragile inside her, a belief she had buried deep to keep it from breaking again. When Amara became pregnant, fear arrived before joy. Daniel reassured her. He spoke of responsibility, of standing by her, of convincing his family. He said love would be enough. He was wrong. His family listened politely when he spoke of marriage. They nodded when he defended her. But when the truth settled, 3 children, no palace protection, a woman with a past, their smiles hardened. She is baggage, his mother said plainly. Our son deserves better, another added. When the decision came, it came swiftly and without apology. Daniel returned one evening, eyes heavy, voice trembling. His family had refused the marriage. He could not go against them. He said he loved her, but love, it seemed, had limits he could not cross. Amara did not beg. She had begged once before. It had changed nothing. She packed her things quietly and left with her children. The pregnancy made the journey heavier. By the time she gave birth again, she was alone, 5 children now clinging to her strength. Poverty tightened its grip. Farming became survival, not livelihood. She worked larger portions of land, borrowed tools, endured sunburn and rain. She sold food cheap to move it quickly. Hunger became a constant visitor again, sitting beside her like an unwanted guest. Still, Amara endured. Time passed. Children grew. Needs multiplied. Then came the third man. He was kinder than the second, less powerful than the first. He married her knowing her past, believing love and effort could outgrow circumstance. For a while, peace seemed possible. She bore him 3 children, bringing her total to 8. But reality does not negotiate with hope. The man grew overwhelmed. Feeding 8 children, 5 not his, broke him slowly. Resentment crept into his voice. Arguments followed. Love strained, then cracked. One evening, without ceremony or warning, Amara gathered her children again and left. 8 children. No husband. No protection. No rest. She did not cry this time. Something inside her had hardened into resolve. If survival was all life offered her, then she would survive fiercely. She farmed more land than anyone expected. She worked until her hands blistered and her back screamed. She fed her children before herself, teaching the older ones to help the younger. She believed education was the only inheritance she could offer, and she clung to that belief desperately. One child listened more closely than the others. The 6th. A quiet boy who watched everything and asked little. A boy who refused to wait for tomorrow. At 10 years old, he began to hustle, packing snails, vegetables, cocoa, anything the bush would give him. He paid his own school fees when he could. He returned home tired but determined. Amara watched him with pride and fear intertwined. She did not know it then, but the child who refused to wait would become the one who carried everything she endured. And just when Amara believed she could finally rest, life prepared its cruelest blow. Because suffering, it seemed, was not yet satisfied. Death does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a tired visitor who has waited long enough. It slips in while hope is distracted, while faith is busy making plans for tomorrow. That was how it came for Amara Okafor, without warning, without ceremony, and without mercy. On the day her body began to weaken, no one panicked. She had worked through sickness before. Fever was familiar. Pain was ordinary. Poverty teaches the body to ignore alarms. Amara continued her chores slowly, forcing herself to smile at her children, brushing off their concern. She promised to rest later. There was always something to finish first. By evening, her condition worsened. Her breathing grew shallow. Her skin burned. The children gathered around her mat, confused and frightened. They sent for help, but help is slower when you have nothing to offer in return. By nightfall, Amara was gone. No last words. No final advice. Just silence. The house filled with confusion before grief arrived. Children stared at one another, waiting for an adult to take control. None came. Neighbors gathered, shaking their heads, whispering prayers, murmuring the same tired sentence. Asterisk, she suffered too much star. 8 children became orphans in one night. The days that followed blurred together. Hunger returned quickly, crueler than before. Food finished faster. Sympathy faded faster still. The older children tried to hold things together, but fear had already fractured their confidence. School became impossible for some. Survival demanded attention. One by one, dreams fell away. Some of the children dropped out of school to learn trades. Others followed menial work wherever it appeared. Life scattered them unevenly, pushing each toward whatever kept hunger away for another day. One child refused. The 6th child. Obinna. He was young, barely 10, but grief aged him overnight. While others accepted reality, Obinna challenged it. He believed his mother's suffering must mean something, that giving up would make it meaningless. He insisted on staying in school, even when attendance became rare and shameful. Most days, he chose hunger over learning. He woke before dawn to enter the bush, packing snails and vegetables until his fingers ached. He weeded farms for strangers. He fished in dangerous waters. He sold everything he could carry, then ran to school, sometimes twice a week, sometimes once. Teachers scolded him. Classmates mocked him. Still, he stayed. At night, exhaustion swallowed him whole. Responsibility found him early. Younger siblings leaned on him instinctively, as though sensing his stubborn strength. Obinna became their quiet pillar, holding a family together with fragile determination. Time passed unevenly. By adolescence, Obinna's childhood had fully disappeared. His body bore marks of labor and survival. His eyes carried a seriousness that did not belong to his age. Education remained his obsession, his rebellion against poverty. Things improved slightly when he began riding a motorcycle on hire purchase. The money helped. The danger multiplied. He rode through rain and dust, dodging death daily. Accidents lurked. Police harassment drained earnings. Still, he paid fees. Still, he showed up to school when he could. He finished primary school against odds that mocked him. He finished secondary school with scars and stubborn pride. Along the way, responsibility multiplied again. That night, Obinna did not sleep. Written promises. The phrase burned hotter now. His suffering rearranged itself in his mind. Poverty no longer felt random. Silence no longer felt innocent. His mother's endurance now looked like protection of secrets, of children, of something unfinished. He looked at his sleeping child, at his siblings, at the debt surrounding him. And he understood something terrifying. If he failed now, it would not just be his life collapsing. Something larger was moving beneath the surface. And it had finally noticed him. There are moments when life presses so hard that something inside you either breaks or sharpens. For Obinna, that moment came quietly. By 19, exhaustion had stopped feeling like a phase. It had become a state of being. He woke tired. He slept tired. Even rest no longer felt like rest. His body carried scars from labor, accidents, hunger, and fear, but it was his mind that felt most worn, always calculating, always anticipating the next crisis. The motorcycle was gone, but its shadow remained. Debt clung to him like a curse. The owner no longer listened to explanations. Payments were demanded whether Obinna earned or not. Threats followed him into sleep. He avoided certain paths in the village, certain faces. Fear had become another bill he paid daily. School was slipping. He missed an important test. Then another. Teachers stopped arguing and started watching him with pity. One finally told him the truth he had been avoiding. "You are intelligent," the teacher said gently. "But intelligence does not survive neglect forever." Obinna said nothing. What could he say? That hunger had no timetable? That responsibility did not respect school calendars? At home, things were worse. One of his younger siblings fell ill. The fever burned for days. Medicine cost money Obinna did not have. He sold the last thing his mother had left behind, a small wrapper she had kept folded carefully untouched. When it was gone, something inside him shifted painfully. That night, he sat alone and cried. Not loudly, quietly, because crying loudly wastes energy. In that silence, anger finally rose fully, not wild anger, not bitterness, but something focused and dangerous. He began to see his life differently. His suffering no longer looked like bad luck. It looked patterned, designed, like the aftershock of something that had happened long before he was born. He started asking questions again. Not recklessly, carefully. He helped elders with chores. He ran errands. He listened when they spoke too freely. Slowly, names surfaced. Positions. Old disputes. And always, his mother's name hovered at the edge of conversations like a ghost people refused to acknowledge. One afternoon, an old man who had once served as a palace messenger spoke without realizing who was listening. She was inconvenient, the man said casually. That was her crime. The word hit Obina hard. Inconvenient. Not guilty. Not foolish. Inconvenient. That night, Obina could not sleep. If his mother had been silenced, then silence had become his inheritance. But inheritance could be challenged, broken, rewritten. Meanwhile, life refused to pause for reflection. Work became riskier. Desperation pushed Obina into dangerous labor, night fishing, distant farms, places where injury was common and mercy rare. One evening, he was falsely accused of theft. Beaten before the truth emerged. He returned home bruised and humiliated, something inside him cracking open. Something had to change. It was during this fragile time that opportunity arrived disguised as coincidence. A visiting NGO worker came to the village to organize a small literacy and skills program. Obina volunteered, not for hope, but for escape from hunger, from despair, from himself. The man noticed his intelligence quickly, asked questions, listened fully. You shouldn't disappear, the man said quietly one evening. People like you don't vanish quietly. They're erased. The words stayed. But hope attracts danger. Days later, Obina received a message that unsettled him deeply. A former palace clerk, old, sick, and afraid of dying with secrets, wanted to see him. The message was urgent. The man claimed to have proof. Documents. Evidence tied directly to Amara Okafor. Meeting him could change everything. It could also destroy him. The clerk's name carried weight. So did the risks. Palace secrets were not handled gently. People who touched them often disappeared. Obina stood at the edge of a decision. Behind him was hunger, debt, exhaustion, and silence. Ahead lay danger, exposure, and truth. That night, he packed a small bag and stood watching his sleeping family. He did not know if he would return the same. He did not know if he would return at all. But he knew one thing with painful clarity. Once the truth was touched, nothing would remain unchanged. And some truths demand blood before they give justice. Some truths do not want witnesses. They fight back. Obina did not tell anyone where he was going. Before dawn, he slipped out quietly, carrying only a small bag and the weight of a decision that could not be undone. The path he followed led beyond familiar farms and footpaths, into areas where the land felt older, heavier, where secrets had learned how to hide well. Every step tightened his chest. The former palace clerk lived on the edge of a forgotten settlement, in a mud house that leaned slightly, as though tired of standing. Age had bent the man's body, but fear had sharpened his eyes. When Obina arrived, the clerk studied him for a long time before speaking, as if deciding whether truth would survive in him. You have your mother's eyes, the old man said finally. That is why I sent for you. Inside the house, the air smelled of dust and regret. The clerk spoke slowly, stopping often to cough, to rest, to gather courage. Each pause stretched Obina's nerves thinner. He confirmed what Obina had suspected. Amara Okafor did not leave the palace empty-handed. She was pushed out. Promises had been made: land, protection, education. Not spoken promises. Written ones. Witnessed ones. Sealed ones. But after Amara bore children, after palace politics shifted, her presence became dangerous. She asked questions, the clerk whispered. And she refused to be quiet. Obina's hands clenched. She knew things, the old man continued. Enough to threaten people who preferred silence. When she left, it was made to look like failure. But it was survival. Why didn't anyone help her? Obinna asked, his voice barely steady. The clerk's eyes filled with tears. Because helping her meant standing against power. The old man reached under his bed and pulled out a wrapped bundle. Inside were old papers, yellowed, brittle, marked with royal insignia. Obinna's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he touched them. Proof. Real proof. Land allocations bearing his mother's name. Educational guarantees for her children. Witness signatures. The royal seal. His mother had not imagined it. She had been robbed. Before Obinna could speak, the clerk grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. You must be careful, he warned urgently. Someone has noticed your questions. The palace does not forget. The warning came too late. On his way back, Obinna sensed it, the wrong kind of quiet. Footsteps behind him. Shadows moving where there should be none. He quickened his pace. So did they. The blow came fast. Hard. Darkness swallowed him. When Obinna regained consciousness, the sun was already low. His head pounded. His body screamed in pain. He sat up slowly, panic rising like fire. The bag was gone. The documents were gone. Fear turned cold inside him. Back in the village, things were worse. People avoided his eyes. Conversations died when he passed. The same elders who once pitied him now watched him with caution. Fear had changed direction. At home, another blow waited. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, had been pressured by her family. Rumors had reached them. Dangerous rumors. They accused Obinna of bringing trouble, of chasing secrets better left buried. That night she left. No argument. No farewell. Just absence. Obinna sat alone in the dark, grief folding over grief until he could barely breathe. He realized then that the truth he sought was already moving, already threatening people powerful enough to strike back. Just when despair threatened to swallow him, an unexpected ally returned. The NGO worker found him, shaken and pale. He admitted that he, too, had been warned to stop associating with Obinna. Instead, he leaned closer. They're afraid, the man said quietly. That means you're right. But even that hope was fragile. Before the night ended, a messenger arrived from the palace. The king was dead, and with his death, the past, long buried, had begun to claw its way into the present. Obinna understood immediately. This was no longer just his mother's story. It was now a battle over land, power, silence, and truth. And he was standing directly in its path. What Obinna did not yet understand was that the king's death had opened a war inside the palace, and his name had already been spoken in dangerous rooms. When a king dies, silence becomes louder than drums. The news did not spread with celebration or mourning. It moved like smoke, quiet, unsettling, impossible to hold. By midday, the palace gates were shut. By evening, guards doubled their watch. Messengers moved in and out without explanation. Power, stripped of its head, began to look for a new spine. Obinna watched from a distance. He felt no grief, no relief, only a tightening in his chest. The king had been a man he never truly knew, yet whose decisions had shaped the worst years of his mother's life. Now that man was gone, and instead of freedom, danger pressed closer. That night, Obinna dreamed of Amara. She stood on farmland that stretched endlessly, barefoot, her wrapper fluttering in a wind that did not touch him. She did not speak. She only looked at him, steady, unblinking, expectant. When Obinna woke, his heart was racing, his body soaked in sweat. By morning, the palace came for him. 2 guards appeared at his compound, their presence stiff and deliberate. Villagers gathered at a distance, pretending not to watch. One guard spoke without warmth. You are to present yourself at the palace. No reason. No refusal allowed. As Obinna followed them, every step felt like walking into his mother's unfinished fate. The palace loomed larger than memory, its walls thick with secrets, its corridors heavy with things unsaid. Inside, the atmosphere was wrong. Senior wives moved quietly, their faces unreadable. Elders whispered behind closed doors. Power was shifting, and everyone knew it. Obinna was not taken to the main court. He was led instead to a guarded room hidden behind the hall. There, he met Chief Nwoy. The man was old but sharp, dressed simply, with eyes that missed nothing. He studied Obinna for a long moment before speaking. "You resemble her," he said softly, "in ways that trouble people." Obinna remained silent. Chief Nwoy spoke carefully. Amara Okafor was not merely a wife. She understood records, agreements, law. She asked questions women were not meant to ask. Obinna's chest tightened. "The documents stolen from you," the chief continued, "were copies. The originals still exist." Hope flickered dangerously. Then the chief lowered his voice. "There is confusion within the palace," he said. "Deliberate confusion. Some elders are spreading the idea that Amara's later children threaten succession." Obinna stiffened. "That is a lie." "Yes," the chief agreed calmly. "But lies are useful." The truth came plainly then. "You are not the king's son," Chief Nwoy said firmly. "Your father was another man entirely. That fact is known to some and ignored by others. Confusion protects those who benefit from it." Relief and anger collided inside Obinna. "They're turning me into a danger," he said. "Yes," the chief replied. "Because a dangerous son is easier to silence than a stolen promise." Before Obinna could respond, shouting erupted outside. Voices rose. Footsteps thundered. Someone was demanding to see him. Chief Nwoy stood abruptly. "You must leave," he said urgently. "Now." Obinna was rushed through a back passage and released beyond the palace walls as night fell. His mind spun. The truth was clearer now, but clarity had made him more vulnerable, not less. By the next day, rumors exploded. A hidden lineage, a forgotten wife, stolen land, dangerous documents. The story twisted with every telling. And quietly, Obinna's name began to circulate in places where names were not spoken lightly. That evening, his compound was visited again. Not violently, but deliberately. His belongings were scattered. Strange symbols were drawn into the dirt. A warning. Stop digging. Or disappear. Obinna sat alone afterward, staring at the destruction. His hands trembled not with fear, but with certainty. Everything he had endured, poverty, loss, rejection, had not been random. It was residue. Fallout from a truth someone had tried to erase. He stood slowly. If lies were being used against him, then truth would be his weapon. Not shouted, not rushed, but undeniable. Somewhere inside the palace, elders argued late into the night. Some wanted Obinna silenced permanently. Others warned that blood would not bury the past. And none of them could ignore one terrible realization. Amara's silence had ended. What Obinna did not yet know was that the final evidence still existed, and retrieving it would force him to choose between safety and everything his mother died for. Some truths are not found. They are rescued. By the time Obinna learned where the final evidence was hidden, danger had already learned his name. The message reached him through a chain of whispers: an old market woman who sold palm oil, a retired messenger who drank too much burukatu, a name passed only at dusk when ears were tired. It led to one place: the old mission school. Abandoned for decades. Forgotten by the state. But not by history. Amara Okafor had once been sent there briefly after leaving the palace, under the promise of education that was never fully honored. She had learned enough, though. Enough to understand how power erased people quietly. Enough to hide what mattered. Obinna arrived at the ruins just before sunset. The building stood half swallowed by bush, its walls cracked, its windows empty like blind eyes. Birds scattered as he stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, damp paper, and something else, waiting. His heart pounded. He searched slowly, methodically, remembering the stories his mother once told him in fragments, about books stacked wrongly, about floors that sounded hollow when stepped on. Then he found it. Beneath a loose floorboard in what used to be a headmistress's office. Wrapped in oilcloth. Protected from rot. Documents. Originals. Land titles bearing Amara's full name. Educational grants signed and witnessed. A written statement, her handwriting unmistakable, detailing the maltreatment she endured, the threats she received, and the forced silence that followed. Obinna sank to his knees. His mother had known she might not survive. She had prepared for this moment. But before relief could settle, footsteps echoed outside. Voices. Low. Male. Familiar. He froze. The door creaked open. 3 men entered. Not villagers. Palace men. One of them smiled thinly. You should have stayed poor, he said. Obinna did not run. He knew better. They dragged him outside, beat him just enough to remind him of fragility, and demanded the documents. He said nothing. Blood filled his mouth. The papers stayed hidden beneath his shirt, soaked now but intact. Just when things began to fade, a voice cut through the night. Enough. Chief Ngoy stepped forward from the shadows, flanked by 2 younger elders. His presence shifted the air. The palace men hesitated. This matter has gone beyond you, the chief said coldly. Touch him again, and you will answer for it. Reluctantly, they backed away. Obinna collapsed. When he awoke, he was not alone. Chief Ngoy sat beside him, his face heavy. You cannot return to your village, the chief said. Not yet. You are no longer invisible. What do I do? Obinna whispered. The chief looked at the documents. You let the truth stand where lies fear daylight. The elders convened secretly days later. The evidence was undeniable. Amara had been cheated. Her children abandoned. Promises broken deliberately. The palace erupted, not publicly, but within. Alliances broke. Old enemies resurfaced. The new king faced his first true test, not of power, but of conscience. Word leaked. The community stirred. People who once mocked Obinna now whispered his name with caution. Some with regret. Others with fear. But truth always demands payment. That night, Obinna's brother, the one who had abandoned school, was attacked on his way home. A warning. The message was clear. Stop. Or we will choose who suffers next. Obinna sat in the dark afterward, hands shaking, heart torn open. Justice had a cost. And it was demanding blood. He understood now that finishing this fight might destroy what little family he had left. But walking away would erase his mother a second time. At dawn, he made his choice. What Obinna decided that morning would either restore Amara's name, or bury her children beneath the same silence that killed her. Truth does not arrive like thunder. It comes like dawn, slow, unavoidable, and impossible to deny. Obinna stood before the council of elders with a calm that surprised even him. His body still carried the marks of the beating, his spirit still ached from loss, but something inside him had settled. Fear had finished its work. It had taken all it could take. Now only purpose remained. The documents lay on the table between them. Originals. Unbroken seals. Unquestionable truth. The room was silent in a way Obinna had never experienced. No whispering. No clearing of throats. Even the elders who had once benefited from Amara's erasure avoided looking directly at her name written boldly across the papers. Chief Ngoy spoke first. These documents confirm that Amara Okafor was legally promised land, education, and protection. They confirm that these promises were deliberately withdrawn. They confirm maltreatment, threats, and forced silence. A murmur rippled through the room. The new king, young, careful, already burdened by a crown heavier than he expected, leaned forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. Why was this allowed to happen? No one answered immediately. Because the answer was ugly. Because it named men who still breathed. Because it admitted that tradition had been used as a weapon. Obinna finally spoke. "My mother did not ask for power," he said quietly. "She asked for what was promised. When she was denied, she left to survive. When survival failed her, she died poor, but not ignorant." His voice did not break. She raised children the world rejected. She worked land she did not own. She was forgotten by those who used her youth in silence. But she prepared for this day. The room shifted. Elders looked at one another, not with unity, but with reckoning. Justice could no longer be avoided. The verdict came slowly, carefully, like a wound being cleaned. Amara Okafor's name was restored publicly. Her children were acknowledged as wronged, not worthless. The land promised to her was returned, not quietly, not secretly, but before witnesses. Educational compensation was ordered for her descendants. More importantly, records were corrected. Her story was written back into history. Some elders resigned in shame. Others lost influence they had clung to for decades. No blood was spilled. His voice did not break. She raised children the world rejected. She worked land she did not own. She was forgotten by those who used her youth in silence. But she prepared for this day. The room shifted. Elders looked at one another, not with unity, but with reckoning. Justice could no longer be avoided. The verdict came slowly, carefully, like a wound being cleaned. Amara Okafor's name was restored publicly. Her children were acknowledged as wronged, not worthless. The land promised to her was returned, not quietly, not secretly, but before witnesses. Educational compensation was ordered for her descendants. More importantly, records were corrected. Her story was written back into history. Some elders resigned in shame. Others lost influence they had clung to for decades. No blood was spilled. But power changed hands. When Obinna walked out of the palace that day, the sun felt different on his skin. Not warmer, just honest. The village reacted in fragments. Some people came to apologize, their voices trembling with regret. Others avoided him, unable to face the memory of how easily they had dismissed him as nothing. Obinna accepted neither praise nor bitterness. He had outgrown both. He returned to the land. The farmland his mother had never been allowed to touch legally was now his responsibility. He did not fence it off greedily. Instead, he worked it, expanded it, employed others, especially children who reminded him of himself. He paid school fees quietly. He taught dignity loudly. His children grew in a home where hunger was no longer normal and shame was no longer inherited. Sometimes at night, Obinna would sit alone and think of Amara, of how she never lived to see justice, of how she carried the weight alone so her children might someday stand upright. He understood then that success was not escaping suffering. It was making suffering unnecessary for those who came after you. Years later, people would tell the story differently. They would speak of a woman who entered a palace poor and left it dangerous, of a son who refused to disappear, of a truth that waited patiently until the right hands found it. But Obinna knew the real ending. It was quieter. It was the sound of children laughing on land that once rejected them. It was the peace of knowing that his moth Anders' name would never again be spoken in whispers. And somewhere, beyond fear and loss, Amara Okafor finally rested. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is not destruction. but survival so complete that history is forced to apologize.